about that anymore. I got vermiculite, I've got the peat moss, and then I got the compost. And now I'm mixing that all up tomorrow, and then I'll start putting that in all the beds. And I wouldn't have known to do that because I'm not a good gardener, right? And you don't have to be. But Buena's so like, do this, now do this, now do this, now do this. So don't plant that yet because it hasn't gotten past our last frost date. So thank you.
So Buena, tell us what the vermiculite and peat moss and what Scott's talking about, what that's all for.
So when you have a raised bed, it's essentially like a big pot. So you don't want to use garden soil or topsoil. And a lot of stuff around here isn't really topsoil anyway. It's out of the bottom of a hole. So it may not even be good. But if you want it to drain well, but also balance that with holding water like it should, you're essentially making a potting soil. And sometimes I use this mix to make my own potting soil. So vermiculite is a volcanic product that they put in an oven and it heats, it pops. It has crevices in it that hold in water and nutrients and release them. And then instead of peat moss, you can use core, which is the hairy stuff on the outside of a coconut. They sell that for the same purpose. And so the vermiculite and the core or peat moss help with the water holding and water drainage. And then the compost has nutrients in it and microorganisms in it. So after you've mixed all that together for a pot or raised bed or whatever, the only thing you ever need to add again is compost.
Would
so
that
you
be
want
the
to
same
add
mix?
Compost every time before you plant.
Would that be the same mix if you were going to be trying to put it on replace your yard with garden?
No, I would just use compost.
Just compost. Okay, cool. So the vermiculite, the peat moss, and the core for when you're doing raised beds, more for when you're doing raised beds.
Or a pot.
Or a pot. Got it.
And you don't need peat moss and core. You would need one or the other.
One or the other. Got it.
So it's compost, vermiculite, and either core or peat moss. If you're using peat moss, they come in a compressed bale. And you want to fluff them up or you'll end up with twice as much peat moss as you should have.
So you need to fluff your peat moss.
Yes. But on the ground, just compost.
Now, are there certain, like as I'm planting, are there certain things that I should be planting together and other things I should not plant near each other at all? Are there any recommendations along those lines?
So there's a lot of books and other information about companion planting. And there's also information about planting by the phases of the moon. There's all kinds of things that could make gardening really complicated. And you can do some of those things if you want to, but the most important thing is plant stuff in the conditions it likes. So don't plant basil in the shade. Don't plant tomatoes in the shade. And cilantro does better in shade. So whether it's sunny or shady, that kind of stuff is more important. And then lavender and sage don't like to stay damp. So if it's an area where it's the soil staying damper, don't put them there.
Okay. That's a good
question for you about compost, Buena. I know we could take an hour on this, but what shouldn't I compost? Try and keep the question simple.
Okay. So nothing from dogs, cats, no meat, bones, dairy, very little, if any, grains, pasta, bread, those kinds of things. The things you should not compost like that can cause disease problems as far as the animal poop, and also can attract more pest problems like rodents and things like that, and tend to be stinky before they decompose. Now, there are people that do huge composting facilities and they can compost those kinds of things, but just for a homeowner, it's not good to add those things to your pile.
I've heard that you can compost anything that was previously alive. Is that something that you would agree on? If it was alive, compost, like cardboard came from trees, right? Simple example.
So you could, that doesn't mean you should. So you put bindweed or grass roots in your compost pile, again, you're probably going to have more of it. Now, if your compost pile gets hot enough so it kills whatever like that, then that may not be a problem. But again, as a homeowner, that's not something I wouldn't put like dandelion seeds in there or something like that.
So when we're out in the country and you see these huge piles wrapped in plastic, I assume that's because They're trying to keep the heat in for that compost to do its job.
Probably.
Okay.
And sometimes it's a big tarp or something. Sometimes
But-
they use a front end loader to mix up the compost because, you know, maybe they have horses or cattle or something like that. So as far as what you should compost, fruit and vegetable peelings. So anything you're eating, cauliflower, corn, whatever. Some people say not to put citrus in their compost pile. I do it all the time. No problem with that. Coffee grounds, tea bags, cotton socks. If you lost a sock or it has a hole in it, it's a cotton sock, throw it in the compost pile. If you
Wow.
have junk mail or old bills or something you want to shred up and it's not slick paper, then shred it and put it in the compost pile.
So not the glossy type wrapping
Right.
type paper, anything. Okay.
Right, not that.
Awesome.
But you want to make sure that you have 1/2 to 2/3 of your compost be brown, which means like cardboard, leaves, straw, think dead stuff, dry stuff. And then the other 1/3 to 1/2 can be green or stuff with more moisture. So like your fruit and vegetable peelings.
Mhm.
And then that mix, if you have that mix and don't put the stuff in there that I said not to put in there, your compost pile should not stink.
And
Nice.
how long is it going to take for a compost pile to be ready, to be
So
finished?
if you turned it every day,
Every
then
day?
it could potent every day, which is more likely if you have one of the tumbling things.
Okay.
And I almost never turn mine. But if you turned it every day, it could potentially be ready in 30 days.
Whoa.
Wow.
So if you don't turn it, it might take a year.
Okay.
Wow.
But turning it helps the stuff on the outside of the pile get into the middle so it can decompose too. And it also adds some air to the pile because usually what's helping the composting needs air. I don't know if you've ever put leaves in a garbage bag on purpose or accidentally and just left them there and you open them up and they smell really bad.
Mhm.
It's still decomposing, but it's anaerobic bacteria that's decomposing it. So you want to add that air into your pile ideally to speed it up. And
You don't recommend like boxing it in at all, or just leave it in a pile like in the corner of the yard?
so you can do it either way. I have a recycle bin that I bought online like 20 years ago because you couldn't buy them locally. It's of recycled plastic. It's still in great shape. And I like it to just be enclosed because then I have less worry about appearances, pests, stuff like that. I do put hardware cloth on the ground first and put the pile on top or the box on top because years ago I had a rat get into my compost pile and it was made out of pallets at the time. And I don't want a rat in my pile. Well, I have a cat now, so I don't really worry about rats, but just as a precaution, that's what I do. If you're not putting things in that I told you not to put in, then again, it's less likely you to have rodents. But just to be sure I do that, you can take chicken wire or like the plastic deer fencing or something and just make a cylinder shaped bin and use that, or just pile it up without anything around it if you want.
Awesome. Awesome.
That's awesome. So you and I just moved here from California to Utah, and I have well, I'll be honest with you. I had no idea what I was doing in California. And so I really have no idea what I'm doing here either. I probably I tried to grow a garden for the last 5 years in California. And I'll be honest, every year I got better. More things lived than died. We were able to eat more things than we did every year as we continue to go. So I feel like I got better at it. But now that I'm here in Utah, and we have listeners in California, Washington, we have listeners all over the country, and actually we have several even in Canada. Where would I go to learn what I can plant? For example, you said we could have been planting in March. Well, what would I have planted in my zone, in my area? What do I need to? Where can I go for resources for those types of things to be able to learn what to plant when and what's good to plant in my area?
Well, locally, you can come to me, but other places, it's hard to say. You can try your local extension service. So each county in the US has an extension service that is connected with the land grant university in that state. And there's extension services that you can just go to and get information. They'll have information like when your last average frost date is. So when to plant different things. Sometimes they have lists of varieties of, they've maybe tested different varieties of corn or tomatoes or something and say, these are some that do well here. That's not to say there's some that do well that they aren't on their list, but that can give you some ideas. They can also help with pest identification, tell you what kind of pests might be in the area and what to do about it. Sometimes they don't list the organic information. I only garden organically, so that's what I help people do. And I think there's lots of reasons to do that. For one thing, now a lot of farmers are having difficulty getting synthetic fertilizers and pesticides. So if for no other reason, that's a good reason to switch to organic. So just keep in mind, they may not have those organic options, but at least if you can find out what a pest is or something, find out other ways to take care of it if they don't have the organic options. So I'd go to the extension service first and see what they have. See if there's somebody that's a garden coach, which is what I am in that area. Those are resources to go to. You can certainly go to gardeninspire.com, which is my garden coaching website. I do have some information on there, like there's an article about what to do about slugs and snails, for example. There's another one about weeds. There's another one about deer, different ideas that may help with deer. So you're welcome to go there and see what you can find.
Awesome. So do I just go to Google and type in extension services in my local area or something like that, and it'll search up?
Yeah, and actually on gardeninspire.com under resources, I have a link to extension services. So it has like a map of the country and you can find out where yours is.
Cool. We'll put a link in, we'll put that link in the description too, so
Okay.
that people can access that. That's excellent.
Another
Yeah.
cool resource, guys, is, if you go back to our archives, go to episode 18, 50, and 51. Buena's in all of those. And we cover a lot of the same things, but in different ways. And so there's going to be a lot of questions answered. So if you're like, I can't wait till next week, I need to know this stuff now, you'll get a lot of it now in those episodes. So 18, 50, and 51. But also download this and play it on repeat, and contact Buena, gardeninspire.com. Check out our Facebook pages. Contact through social media is easy.
And if you're here locally, come on in to Basin and Rose.
It's a cute store. Like I keep saying, I'm going to bring my daughter, and every time I come while she's at school. I'm like, I got her to get stuff. I'm in a rush. I need this. Like just the other day, I'm like, I need all the vermiculite. No, I said, I need all I called it something else.
Perlite, maybe?
I think I said perlite.
Which is something different.
She's like, you mean vermiculite? And I'm all, I guess. I'm like, I'm a garden dummy. So everyone that's listening, wherever you are, start. Listen to Buena, find local gardening experts that can help you. What's the biggest mistake most gardeners make when they first start?
Maybe doing too much is one thing. So, start with a few things and go from there, and planting at the wrong times, like thinking they have to wait to plant is a big one. And then watering.
Oh,
yes.
I have a question.
Oh, that's you?
I have a question.
Watering. Do I need to water every day, every other day, or different things needing more water?
So things need different water, depending on what it is. So most things do not need watered every day.
Okay.
And if it's brand new seeds, the soil needs to stay damp, which doesn't necessarily mean every day. Just depends on the weather, time of year, all of that. And in the middle of summer here in northern Utah, I usually water my garden every other day.
Okay.
I didn't change anything about that last year when it was super hot. I watered exactly the same and things were just fine. But people tend to overwater. They say more plants are killed by overwatering than underwatering. If something's in a container, pot, raised bed, or whatever, stick your finger into the soil and see how damp it actually is or dry it actually is, because on top it can look drier or wetter than it actually is.
I killed my plants last year. I overwatered like crazy. I had 6 tomato bushes, and I finally stuck my finger in the soil, and I was like, it's just a marsh. It was a marsh down there. I'm like,
So
yeah,
Buena, Quick
Don't water too
question.
much.
I guess call this my last question is, we all like to see